Egypt region is a true racial crossroads. There's no doubt that the engravings of ancient Egypt reveal a great diversity of very different human branches. And it's certain that there was much greater racial diversity than today. Alongside the brown-skinned Orientals, many mummies of pharaohs and nobles attest to the presence of an ancient blonde and red-haired elite with European traits. In the temples, the frescoes show men and women with white skin, red, blonde, and black hair, with blue eyes. This little-known aspect of Egyptian civilization reveals a hidden part of its origin. For civilization to have emerged on this arid and seemingly hostile land, this white-skinned ruling caste played a crucial role. Early in its history, Egypt had to be formed by an advanced and highly ingenious people capable of undertaking and successfully carrying out the work necessary for the construction of dikes, canals, and terracing, allowing for agriculture and the appearance of temples and pyramids. The pyramids could only have been built by the creative power of engineers and specialists in construction sciences, astronomy, and mathematics. Contrary to the claims of some Egyptologists, they are not the work of the current Egyptian populations, who are mixed, represented by the Fellahin, the Copts, the Bedouin Arabs, the Beja from Ethiopia, and the Eastern Sudanese. The first traces of civilization in Egypt bear witness to the arrival of a migratory white-skinned people. More than 8,000 years ago, the ancestral populations of the Celts, Celtiberians, Basques, and Gironds migrated to Spain from Europe, moving south towards the Strait of Gibraltar, which they crossed in several waves to reach Morocco. The Libyans, Berbers, and Kabyles, with red and blonde hair and blue eyes, whose remnants are still visible in some mountain valleys, originally descended from these prehistoric European populations. Their ancestors crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and then traversed the Western Sahara and the Greater Berber region. It was still filled with lush forests and rivers at that time. It's important to remember that until the 4th millennium BCE, the Sahara had not yet undergone its desertification process. Thus, this region of over 9 million square kilometers was a vast, green expanse with large lakes and landscapes comparable to Europe. It was therefore quite favorable for human societies. During their expansions, these people constructed numerous pagan relics in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and even Egypt. It is rather surprising to observe tens of thousands of dolmens, menhirs, and megaliths similar to those in Europe, which have largely fallen into oblivion today. It is widely accepted that the megalithic culture originated in Western Europe, particularly in regions such as the Iberian Peninsula, France, the British Isles, and the coastal areas of the Atlantic. This culture then spread massively to North Africa through ancestral European migrations, who were the bearers of this tradition. In the popular legends of Morocco and Algeria, the Arabs had several terms to describe the ancient builders of these tombs: Juhala and Beni Juhala. These Arabic words described very tall pagans, even giants, who inhabited the region long before the creation of the Roman Empire and the advent of Islam. At first glance, one might think that megalithic structures were non-existent in these countries, but in reality, it is fascinating to see that no region in Europe has as many necropolises as eastern Algeria and central Tunisia. Today, these sites are entirely ignored by the general public and even most researchers. While part of these populations decided to settle along the North African coasts or penetrate the interior of Saharan territories, others chose to follow the Mediterranean coasts and continue their migration to the Nile Valley. These first arrivals encountered a few Oriental nomads, But the majority of the region was entirely empty. From north to south, they settled along the fertile banks of the Nile and founded several megalithic sites of European culture, particularly the pagan sanctuary of Naphtali, estimated to be around 6,900 years old. The comparison of Naphtali with the megalithic sites of Western Europe is far from coincidental. This stone circle is perfectly aligned to the north, and at each summer solstice, the sun's rays penetrate between two portals. The historian Budge said, the pre-dynastic Egyptians, meaning their indigenous layer from North Africa, belonged to a white race with fair skin and light hair. Geographically, the Nile Valley, thanks to its floods, was an extremely fertile strip of land in the middle of a semi-arid region. The first white men then gathered as close as possible to these lagoons to cultivate the land and establish various colonies to facilitate human transport and streamline commercial exchanges between the different communities. Several river and maritime ports were quickly built during the pre-dynastic era, characterized by the coexistence of autonomous kingdoms along the Nile. Their ships, very similar to Nordic boats, were true works of art, embodying great nobility compared to the few Oriental tribes. The white Africans knew how to build sturdy vessels similar to those of the Veneti, which later garnered admiration from Caesar. The fact that the oldest Egyptian ships were already designed for the open sea reveals the high level of sophistication of this civilization. As seen on the frescoes of the Temple of Deir el-Medin, these ships were capable of navigating the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and even the Atlantic Ocean. This was due to the presence of their high prows and sterns. It is worth noting that the rock carvings of the oldest ships from Sweden bear remarkable resemblance to those from Upper Egypt. All these engravings were corroborated by the discovery in 1991 at Abydos, Egypt, of 12 large boats dating back over 5,000 years, very similar to those carved on rocks. 2 more ships of this type were unearthed in 2000, bringing the total to 14. Additionally, at the foot of the pyramid of Khufu, 2 large seafaring ships were found buried, similar in shape and size to those from the rock engravings and those discovered at Abydos. The first one measured 44 meters in length. These facts confirm the ability of the early pharaohs to navigate the open seas. The multitude of Egyptian ports traded with the regions of the Red Sea, the Libyan coasts, the Greek islands, and even beyond the Mediterranean Sea. It appears that while the first white emigrants to Egypt came from North Africa, certain branches made their way to the Nile by passing through Palestine and the Jericho Valley, aided by trade routes. They originated from Anatolia, Kurdistan, Cilicia, the Zagros Mountains, and Armenia. Let us not forget that at this time, the entire region between present-day Turkey, the southwestern Caucasus, and Syria was dominated by Proto-Celts from the Göbekli Tepe culture. From the earliest Egyptian dynasties, major metallurgical centers located in eastern Turkey and northern Mesopotamia traded with Egypt. Long caravans transported numerous objects, jewelry, daggers, axe blades, and knives to the most important Egyptian cities. From the early dynasties, major metallurgical centers located in eastern Turkey and northern Mesopotamia traded with Egypt. Thus, the early ancient Egyptians descended from white migrants from North Africa and the Turkey-Caucasus-Syria-Mesopotamia axis. 6,000 years ago, these various white colonies banded together through alliances under 2 banners, Upper and Lower Egypt. Centuries later, they united under a single central government, generally attributed to King Menes. 6,000 years ago, the various white colonies grouped under the banners of Upper and Lower Egypt, and then, centuries later, under one central government, typically credited to King Menes. This event marked the beginning of an era of political stability and prosperity for Egypt, with the rise of a powerful pharaonic monarchy and the construction of the first Great Pyramids. The Pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, as well as the Sphinx of Giza, the Karnak Temple, and Abu Simbel, all attest to the presence of these highly skilled engineers on Egyptian soil. At the same time that Egypt's aristocratic racial elite was building cultural oases, flourishing gardens and monumental structures, two other populations from the far south were gradually approaching the fertile lands of the north. These were hordes of black Ethiopians moving up the Nile from Nubia over 5,000 years ago, and Semitic groups originating from the Arabian Plateau. The mixing with whites among the lower classes gave rise to a yellow-brown people, similar to what occurred in India 1,500 years later. Fortunately, the rarer ruling class strived to preserve its heredity, despite not being spared from the social elevation of an increasing number of Orientals, Asians, and a few black men. It remained composed of a vast pool of officials, nobles, priestesses, and kings who belonged to the white race. It even benefited from a regular biological contribution through the arrival of blonde Libyans, the Sea Peoples, Greeks, and Romans. Today, with the advent of genetic analyses, we have finally been able to uncover the identity of many Egyptian mummies. Across different periods, recent genetic studies support the fact that the ancient Egyptians of the ruling castes were very close to modern Europeans, but very distant from modern Egyptians. Indeed, a large 2017 study by Verena Schuenemann sequenced the genome of 151 mummies. Once extracted, the DNA data revealed that ancient Egyptians are more closely related to samples from European Neolithic populations than to modern Egyptians. The chapter Genetic Analysis of Population Nuclear DNA reads, "We found that the ancient Egyptian samples were distinct from modern Egyptians and closely related to Near Eastern and European samples. Conversely, modern Egyptians are close to sub-Saharan African populations. When comparing this pattern with modern Egyptians, we find that the ancient Egyptians are more closely related to all the modern and ancient European populations we tested." The study explains that modern Egyptians have an additional African component that was not present before. This is due to later migrations of black populations and the importation of slaves organized by the Arabs for over a millennium. Moreover, the site of the mummies was relatively in southern Egypt, so it is suspected that as one moves northward, the European ancestry of the burials increases further. This conclusion aligns with the hypotheses of scientist Pagani, who estimated that the proportion of the non-African population in ancient Egyptians was 80%, and dated the majority of the mixing with sub-Saharan populations to around 750 years ago. Other DNA studies on pharaohs, nobles, or members of the royal family have also revealed their belonging to the white race. Indeed, following a genetic analysis, Swiss researchers discovered that Pharaoh Tutankhamun was of European genetic descent. The researchers reconstructed the DNA profile of Tutankhamun, as well as that of his father Akhenaten and his grandfather Amenhotep III. They found that the young pharaoh belonged to the European haplogroup R1 and 2. Roman Scholz, director of the IGENEA Genetic Center, declared, "It was very interesting to discover that he belonged to a European genetic group. The researchers were surprised to find that less than 1% of modern Egyptians carry this haplogroup, while up to 70% of Europeans possess it. Just a few meters away from where Tutankhamun was buried, a burial known as KV55 was also the subject of a phenotypic reconstruction by the Center for Forensic Anthropology. The results indicated that this noble individual belonged to the white race. A research team from the Biomedical Egyptology Center at the University of Manchester managed to determine that the mummy of Takabuti from the 25th Egyptian dynasty was European. Mitochondrial analysis revealed that she belonged to haplogroup H4A1, which is currently dominant in Europe. According to another study by Zahi Hawass and colleagues, published in 2010 and made public after a data leak, Akhenaten and his patrilineal lineage also belong to haplogroup YR1b1, a 2, typical of Western Europe and rare in Egypt. Since the 2000s, genetics has revolutionized our understanding of the ancient Egyptians, as it has finally shed light on the European ethnic component of some of its members. However, studies on Egyptian mummies are only one facet of our discoveries. In fact, evidence of the presence of the white race among the Egyptian ruling elites is not limited to genetics. It is everywhere, in the countless depictions, bas-reliefs and historical references where homage is paid to gods, pharaohs, noblemen and priestesses with white skin, blonde or red hair, and blue, green or grey eyes. Among the Egyptians, this idea of blondness associated with the purity of whiteness dates back to the origins of Egypt. According to Egyptian traditions, the first female pharaoh in history was the blonde Queen Nitocris of the 6th dynasty over 4,000 years ago. Manetho, a great priest and Egyptian historian of the 3rd century BCE, speaks of her in particularly laudatory terms. There was a woman named Nitocris who reigned. She was more courageous than all the men of her time, and she was the most beautiful of all women, with the appearance of a blonde with rosy cheeks. Queen Nitocris, described by Manetho as a fair-skinned blonde, was the builder of the 3rd pyramid of Giza. Some Egyptologists, including Joyce Ann Tildesley, believe that she was the daughter of Merenra I and Queen Ninth. In Giza, excavations of the mastaba near the pyramid of Khufu have identified, on the west wall of the main chamber of a burial room, Queen Hetifes II, who is painted with blonde hair. This future queen was the daughter of Pharaoh Khufu, who erected the largest and most magnificent pyramid in Egypt. Originally, it was covered with polished white limestone, which gave it a smooth and shiny appearance. American Egyptologist George Reisner described the appearance of Queen Hetifes II by saying, "Her short hair is painted a bright yellow with thin horizontal red lines. It seems clear that this lady was blonde or red-haired." Queen Tiye, 18th dynasty, was the daughter of Thuya, a priestess of the god Amun. Thuya's mummy, discovered in 1905, has long blonde red hair. Examinations of Thuya's mummy proved that she bore a striking resemblance to her mother. B. Adams, Egyptian Mummies, 1988. In the 1st century BCE, the Roman poet Catullus says in verse 62 of his 66th poem that the Egyptian Queen Berenice II, daughter of King Ptolemy VIII and Queen Cleopatra III, was flavus, which means blonde in Latin. In a fresco from the necropolis of Beni Hassan, there are 4 women depicted, 2 of whom are redheads and 2 blondes. In the tomb of Pharaoh Merneptah, Two red-haired priestesses with distinctly Nordic features can be seen, accompanied by black servants. These women undoubtedly recall the Egyptian goddess Hathor, who was often portrayed as a deity with red or golden hair. She was associated with love, fertility, and motherhood, and her physical traits were considered signs of her divinity. In addition to the goddess Hathor, there was also the red-haired god Set, who was initially worshipped as a protector god against the forces of chaos, symbolized by the giant serpent Apophis. As such, he was often depicted as a heroic warrior battling evil forces. However, over time, Set's role in Egyptian mythology evolved, and he became associated with darker and more negative aspects. He was involved in several myths and legends where he challenged other gods and caused disturbances, notably by killing his brother Osiris, which ultimately transformed him into a more ambiguous and sometimes malevolent figure. Seti I, son of Ramses I, is often regarded as one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. He is known for leading victorious military campaigns, thereby consolidating Egypt's power over its neighboring territories. It is in the frescoes of his tomb that we can observe the famous blonde, blue-eyed Libyans from whom he descended, as well as a depiction of the four races of ancient Egypt: white, black, brown, and yellow. His son was none other than Ramses II, the red blonde-haired pharaoh and great builder, one of the most famous figures in Egyptian history. Under his reign, Egypt experienced a period of prosperity and grandeur, marked by significant construction projects such as the Temple of Abu Simbel and the Temple of Karnak. His mummy is one of the most iconic. Ramses III, though not directly the son of Ramses II, was a descendant of the royal lineage established by Seti I and Ramses II. He is best known for repelling foreign invaders and preserving Egypt's integrity during his tumultuous reign. The blonde hair of his mummy, as well as the frescoes depicting him, attest to his whiteness and confirm his Nordic ancestry. In addition to these facts, the presence of Egyptian statues with blue eyes demonstrates the importance of this symbolism and that Egypt's elite was led by men and women of European origin. True Egypt looked toward the north. The impressive number of ruling queens, high priestesses, and female deities who played a fundamental role during ancient Egypt's time is in total opposition to any African or Semitic conception. This is proof that its original core was not one of black or Oriental peoples, who now form modern Egyptians, but of the white biological essence. All Egyptologists agree in emphasizing that several millennia ago, the pagan values and virtues of ancient Egypt placed women as intermediaries between men and gods. Due to their deep sensitivity, women embody the feminine element of the world and are composed of an ethereal substance that is much less dense and material than that of men. As a result, they are more inclined to enter spiritual realms. The feminine element represents the receptive aspect, the one who is penetrated and thus receives. Altruistic, sensitive, intuitive, and inward-facing in human nature. This feminine force is often compared to the lunar principle, symbolizing fertility and healing. Men, in contrast, represent strength, power, will, and rationality. They embody the active, external, material, and penetrating aspect of creation, being the force that initiates movement and transformation in the world. This masculine force is often compared to the solar principle, symbolizing light, warmth, and growth. African and Oriental peoples do not share this worldview, where women are generally reduced to the same status as children. The spirit of the land of the pharaohs is well reflected in Pharaoh Akhenaten's love song to Nefertiti. Your beauty is dazzling like the sun. Your gaze shines like the morning star. Your hair is of gold shining like precious metal, and your face radiates with grace and nobility. Beyond these facts, many renowned Egyptologists have emphasized the whiteness of the original Egyptian type. Ancient Egypt, for example, was essentially an infusion of Caucasoid racial elements into Africa. This civilization was born from the establishment of Mediterranean, Armenoid, even Nordic and Atlantean elements in North Africa. A painting of the mother of Pharaoh Amenhotep reveals that she had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a rosy complexion. In 1929, archaeologists discovered the mummy of Queen Mariette Aman. Even at 50 years old, the mummy had wavy, light brown hair. American Egyptologist Donald Ryan excavated the tomb KV-60 in the Valley of the Kings in 1989. Inside, he found the mummy of a royal woman, and he believes it to be the long-lost remains of the great Queen Hatshepsut. The mummy was largely unwrapped and lying on its back. Strands of reddish-blonde hair lay on the ground beneath the bald head. Princess Ranofri, daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose III, is depicted as a blonde in a mural recorded in the 19th century by Italian Egyptologist Ippolito Rosellini. Verena Schuenemann, who conducted genetic studies on ancient Egyptians, said the following about the importance of race within ancient Egypt. Under Ptolemaic and Roman rule, ethnic ancestry was crucial for belonging to an elite group and provided a privileged position in society. Especially in Roman times, there may have been significant legal and social incentives to marry within one's ethnic group, as Roman nationals had to marry other Roman citizens to pass on their citizenship. Such policies likely affected mixed marriages between Romans and non-Romans to some extent. Throughout pharaonic history, the Nile Valley witnessed various racial interactions, attracting entire groups of Semitic merchants from the Arabian Peninsula and the arrival of Nubian slaves from the south of the empire. As a result, the blood of the white race became widely diluted over the centuries, until these mixed Caucasoids became the so-called Hamites, introducing mixed-race individuals into Egyptian power, and more rarely, a few blacks.